Okay, this video is about Reims Cathedral. Reims Cathedral is up here in France. Here is Paris, and you can see there's sort of a ring of famous cathedrals around Paris. Reims Cathedral was the site of coronation of French kings. It began here with Clovis. Clovis was the pagan king of the Franks, and in the year 500, some say, 496 AD, he was baptized into Christianity. And his baptism into Christianity took the pagan, he was, pagan king of the Franks. It brought Christianity into France in a big way. And this led to the coronations of French kings being done at Reims Cathedral. Okay, here's a painting of Reims Cathedral, and this is the coronation of King Louis XV. Beautiful painting there. Reims Cathedral was sort of built around 1210. It wasn't finished until about 1345. It was a lot of damage in World War I. Then there was restoration after that. They lost a lot of the stained glass windows. But anyways, here is another painting from Reims Cathedral with the coronation of King Charles VII. And what's interesting is about this painting is Joan of Arc is standing right next to him. And in 1429, they had sort of effectively driven the British out of France. So that was a great historical victory for the French. And Joan of Arc has her own chapel. Saint Joan of Arc has her own chapel in the Reims Cathedral. Here's a picture of the front or the west facade, and then some unique things about it. As you'll see, here is the front door, if you will, on the west facade. Sort of like the sun comes up in the east, like the light of God, and that's the light behind the altar. And then as you move towards the other side, the west side, there's three doors. The main door is going to open up into the main pathway into the nave. The side doors opened up, and the side pathway is called the aisles. This spot just above the door is called the lintel. Right here is called the tympanum. And then this roof is called the archivolt. And then the little design above that is called the gables. I'll show all this stuff in more detail in a moment. Here's the rose window, and then here's a row of Old Testament kings and prophets, and these are like the bell towers. Okay, so it's a spectacular design. Think about it. This stuff was built back in 1300. And architecture came first before top-level painting. And so you won't see that much painting in these compared to like some of the later cathedrals. And Italy, I think, is better than France at integrating painting into the indoor part of cathedral. France is better at building a cathedral. France cathedrals are magnificent. Okay, so this is from inside Reims Cathedral, and we're looking back at the west facade at the front door. And you can see here's the little tympanum window just immediately above the door. Here's some little lancet windows in between the door, and then here's the big rose window. Okay, and the spectacular high vaulted ceiling. These little side pathways on the other side of these pillars here, those are called the aisles. Okay, and this is the nave. Okay. So here's another look at it. You come in the side doors, you're walking into the aisles. Okay, you come down the main door, you're walking into the nave. The first level heights there, arcade, the gallery, the clerestory. Up here is the vault. Okay. The little gargoyles are the water spouts. And then there's the flying buttresses which enable support of these walls because the arches give us a lot of outward force. So the flying buttresses, they handle that outward force which enables thin walls on the sides of the nave and allows big windows so you can get a lot of light in there. And you can build the ceiling really high because it's being supported there. Here's just a little more pictures about it. This little thing in the middle of the door is called a trumeau. And this, like I said, is called the lintel. The tympanum's right here, and it differs from like the last cathedral we looked at, Chartres. They had a bunch of statues in here in the tympanum rather than the window like we're seeing now in Reims Cathedral. Okay, this is an arcade where they had the Old Testament kings and prophets statues on Reims Cathedral. And then this part right here above the archivolt is sort of the hooded roof here. It's called the archivolt, and then right above that is the gable. Okay, so here is looking back at the west facade, and this is the tympanum window, and it's rather just beautiful. And again, there's more like Old Testament prophets, all their little statues around here. So you can think of, think of like the comic book Mad Magazine, in the margins they had Sergio Aragone's, all his little drawings. And of course, that reminds me of the Bible, with the illustrations from the Irish monks, the Book of Kells, for example. But it also reminds one of the cathedrals. And this is very characteristic of Christianity, this desire to keep on making something more beautiful, more elaborate. And it's spectacular. All these little action figures of saints and prophets and Old Testament kings, all the beautiful painted windows. It's just great. I love all this stuff. These are the most beautiful buildings ever made in the history of the world. Here's a look at the flying buttresses from the side. You can see these are the flying buttresses. They even put little statues everywhere. People could barely see that without a binocular, but they still had this desire to make everything elaborate, ornate, and beautiful. God could see it, so they wanted it to be beautiful. And these flying buttresses supporting the arches of the roofs enable the walls to be thin and high. And these are little lancet windows, and they let in tons of light. So that's how you can get a lot of light into these buildings, even though, they didn't have electricity back in 1200, 1300. But they still had spectacular lighting because of that. And the high ceilings, etc. So here's another indoor look at Reims Cathedral. And now we're looking towards the altar. It's just beautiful. And here's one of the gargoyles, rain spouts. And again, that's one of the great things about Christianity. There are certain things you have to respect. You have to respect other individuals, be nice and all that. But it actually gives you creative freedom to play and have a sense of humor. You'll notice a lot of other religions don't have much of a sense of humor. Christianity does. It finds all this stuff like making a rain spout into a gargoyle. It finds that funny. And then at the same time, it loves all these little statuary. We're going to see some more of these statues. Reims is kind of famous for improving on its statues. So here's a roll of Old Testament kings and prophets. And up close, you'll be amazed at how good the statuary is. So these are made by anonymous persons, and they're made individually, yet they're still spectacular. They're not quite Michelangelo caliber, but they're great. Now here is on the gable above the tympanum and above the archivolt. So this is sort of like the archivolt. Right beneath that will be the tympanum window of Reims Cathedral. And here's Jesus crowning Mary as Queen of Heaven. And she's also the intercessor for the people when they go before the Last Judgment. But you can just see how beautiful it is. And just look at the quality and the free movement of the statuary here. You can see their gestures. You can see their facial expressions. And this is all quite spectacular. This is done in 1300. I mean, it's amazing. Okay, just another reminder, the sun comes up in the east, and that's where the altar is, back in here. Okay, and this is called the ambulatory. The north and south facade, and then here's the west facade, which we were talking about, the two bell towers. This was the main door into the nave. These are the aisles. Okay, here's a painting of the angel Gabriel making the annunciation to Mary that she will bear Christ, by Sandro Botticelli, the great Italian artist. And here is the Annunciation, Angel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary. This one's by Philippe de Champagne, 1645. Okay, and that's a prelude to these statues here. So this statue here is the Angel Gabriel, and this is the Virgin Mary. And you can see he's got a rather, sort of unique individualistic face on the Angel Gabriel, and Mary to some extent too. And their statuary is relatively free of the columns behind them. So these are more creative, free-moving, lifelike statues than had been seen previously on cathedrals. And here's another painting from the early days. This is the visitation of the Virgin Mary here to Elizabeth. So she's pregnant with Jesus in her belly. And Elizabeth, who had been barren for many years, is pregnant with John the Baptist in her belly. And they went to visit and spend time together. So there's a painting of the famous event. And I'll show you the statue related to that. And so these statues are actually next to each other. Right here is the statue of the visitation between Mary and Elizabeth. And these are sort of in a Roman style. They're wearing these, dresses that are like togas, okay? This is more of a medieval style, but still you can see that their body positions, their hand gestures, they're relatively free. These are not like the totally vertical jam statues in the door jams that one sees typically on a Gothic cathedral. These are more free-flowing, lifelike, with natural body positions and whatnot. Rather beautiful. That angel's face is sort of the most famous statue on of the statues of Reims Cathedral. Okay, and so that's it for Reims Cathedral. I hope you enjoyed it, and you can see how beautiful these buildings are. Back in 1200 and 1300, the Christians built the greatest, most beautiful buildings ever made in the history of the world.